Jaguar Paw knew this was his only chance. The Mayans had promised him. If he could reach the cornfield ahead, he might survive. But behind him, the warriors laughed, amused by his desperation. They weren't chasing him to let him go. They were playing with him, dangling hope before snatching it away, because to them only the gods had the right to decide who lived and who died. A Mayan warrior, stationed near the cornfield, saw Jaguar Paw's final struggling steps. Without hesitation, he rushed forward, prepared to deliver the killing blow. No one was allowed to escape. No one was given a second chance. The moment a hunted prey showed even the slightest chance of survival, they crushed it instantly. This was the brutal law of the land, the way the Mayans ensured their dominion. Hope was an illusion, and mercy did not exist. Suddenly, two men were shoved forward. This time they had learned from their fallen companions. Instead of running straight, they zigzagged unpredictably. Their swift, erratic movements made it difficult for the Mayans to land a clean hit. Even the deadly long-haired warrior missed his mark. His arrows flew wildly, and his weapons were tossed in frustration, yet he failed to touch them. Finally, an archer in the crowd had enough. He raised his bow, aimed high, and fired at an unusual angle. The arrow arced through the air, piercing straight through one man's skull. The archer's deadly shot stunned the crowd. Seeing its success, the Mayan leader decided to mimic his technique. Without hesitation, his arrow struck another man in the abdomen. Believing the threat was eliminated, the cornfield guard stepped forward to finish off the wounded. But just as he approached, the injured man grabbed him. Seizing the moment, the archer snapped the arrowhead lodged in his stomach and braced himself. As the guard freed himself and moved in for the kill, the archer blocked his dagger. With a swift thrust, he drove the broken arrow into the Mayan's throat. The leader stood in shock, unable to process what had just happened, until his son collapsed before him. Only then did he realize that the injured archer had managed to strike back. Seeing his son's lifeless body, the leader lost his composure. Meanwhile, the archer, enduring excruciating pain, yanked the arrowhead from his waist. With nothing left to lose, he lunged forward, surrendering his fate to the gods. He sprinted toward the cornfield, his only hope of survival. For the first time, fear crept into the hearts of the Mayans. The deaths of their own had shaken them. They immediately gave chase, just as the archer burst out of the cornfield. He tumbled into a pit, landing hard. As he regained his senses, a horrifying sight unfolded before him. A mass of headless corpses piled high. The unsettling softness beneath him made his skin crawl. It was then that he realized the bodies had cushioned his fall. He had survived, but at a gruesome cost. Panic surged through him. It wasn't the countless corpses that sent chills down his spine. It was the thought that he might soon become one of them. The Mayans were closing in. With no other choice, the wounded archer dragged himself toward a towering tree. Straining against his injuries, he climbed, desperate to disappear into the shadows before his hunters arrived. He heard footsteps approaching below. Holding his breath, he endured the pain, not daring to make a sound. But then, his blood dripped onto the back of a passing Mayan. Luckily, the warrior was too focused on the path ahead to notice. The archer remained unseen and at last managed to slip away. But there was no time to rest. Just as he turned, he found himself face to face with a massive black jaguar. A deep growl rumbled behind him. When he glanced back, another jaguar, fully grown, was locked onto him with piercing eyes. Meanwhile, the Mayans sensed something was wrong. They had chased him this far, yet now the trail had gone eerily cold. As the Mayans searched in confusion, one of them suddenly noticed blood on his companion's back. Realizing what it meant, they immediately split up to hunt him down. But the archer no longer hid. Instead, he revealed himself, because now he wasn't just running from them. He was being chased by a jaguar. The Mayans, unaware of the beast behind him, instinctively rushed toward their target. In doing so, they unknowingly trapped themselves. Their reckless charge turned into chaos, and in the next moment their mistake became clear. The jaguar lunged, and the warriors scrambled. Instead of going after the archer, they focused on killing the beast. But by the time they struck it down, they had already lost precious time. The wounded archer could barely see, but his will to survive burned stronger than ever. The hatred between him and the Mayans had only deepened, old grudges and new rage now fueling their pursuit. This time the Mayans held nothing back. They quickly caught up, weapons ready to strike. But the archer, just like the jaguar before him, was too fast, dodging each deadly blow. Still, he knew the truth. Outrunning them forever was impossible. So as he burst out of the dense forest, he was met with a terrifying sight, a towering waterfall plunging into the unknown. The Mayans were closing in fast, giving him no time to hesitate. With no other way out, he leaped. The Mayans watched as their enemy plunged from the towering waterfall, convinced his foolishness had sealed his fate. But then, a shadow surfaced in the water below. He was alive. Despite his injuries, the archer swam ashore and stood tall, declaring his victory. The Mayans could only laugh bitterly from above, powerless to reach him. Their leader's rage boiled over. Without hesitation, his men took a detour to continue the chase. One warrior, eager to prove himself, leapt first, only to meet a brutal fate as his head struck the rocks below. However, in the face of a 50% chance of survival, the Mayans also fell safely. Looking at this scene, the enemy regretted at the moment and sighed that he shouldn't have been so proud that they chased themselves like they were going to die. But at this time, he had no choice but to escape. Unexpectedly, he accidentally fell into a swamp again, into the jungle. The man who ran away jumped up, but when he landed, he stepped into the Ghost Dragon Pass. As the enemy's body slowly disappeared, he also caught the only life-saving straw. But who would have thought that a small vine could not support his 250-pound body? And the broken vine also meant that the enemy lost a chance to survive. But at this time, a palm suddenly came out of the swamp. The enemy used a milk-eating mirror to cover his arm. He soon grabbed the ground not far away. When he dug out of the swamp, he had become a mud man. However, the dead enemy did not rush to escape, because he knew that if he didn't solve the Mayans chasing him, the feeling of death would accompany him for the rest of his life. So he decided not to run away like a stray dog. He wants to turn passivity into initiative. Later, when the Mayans chasing him came up, the enemy already had a package in his hand. Without further ado, he threw away the weapon in his hand. While the bees were dragging the Mayans' feet, he broke the spikes on the tree in the jungle. Then he used the spikes to repeatedly prick the back of the poisonous frog. After everything was ready to go, he hid in the dark and watched the Mayans who had escaped the bees. Then he made a fatal blow to one of the people behind him. The poison of the frog soon spread to the man's whole body, but he shouted before he died. He was heard by his companions, so he immediately turned back. He happened to see the enemy who was ready to pick up the weapon. He found the enemy's moment. The atmosphere around him suddenly dropped to the ice. The hero who meets the hero wins. The hatred between them has reached an indescribable level. The two rushed to each other, almost at the same time. Just as the axe was about to fall on the head of the enemy, he dodged the fatal blow of the Mayans with a bend. Although his head was slightly bruised, he did not forget to pick up the weapon on the ground when he slipped. He used the habit of the enemy to turn around immediately. He gave the other party a heavy hammer. The Mayans, who were stunned, knelt on the ground for a moment. Holding the principle of taking his life while he was sick, the enemy did not send him to see God politely. But at this time, it started to rain heavily in the sky. It seems to think of something. The enemy, regardless of his own injury, flew to a certain position. When he arrived, he saw his wife and son hidden in the pit. They were drowning in the rain. He wanted to save them with his own hands, but the Mayans, who were reluctant to do so, were getting more and more aggressive. For the sake of himself and his family's safety, Rudy had to distract the enemy first. But because he was worried about his wife's safety, he did not even want to run away. He was soon caught up by the leader of the Mayans. Before he could react, he was shot in the chest by the enemy's archer. Unwillingly, Rudy endured the pain and stood up and broke the bowstring on his body. He looked at the Mayans who had put him in such a situation, and the leader would not let him go. He rushed to the front, but he did not know that he had fallen into the trap set by Rudy for him. When the two Mayans behind him arrived, their leader had already lost his breath, and Rudy ran away with his legs. It seems that it was a team of more than 10 people. There are only 2 left now. The angry Mayans immediately chased them up until they ran to the beach. All 3 were stunned by the scene in front of them. The Mayans no longer had the courage to fight. What should have appeared in front of them was a huge fog. This is something that the two have never seen since they were born. They ran towards the outsider, who was about to approach the shore. However, Rudy was still awake at the moment, because his family was still waiting in the pit. When he came back, he found that his wife and son were unharmed, and his wife gave birth to a baby for him. After the rain, Rudy took his family into the jungle. But looking at the vast ocean, he knew that the backward Mayan civilization was about to be replaced by these outsiders. However, none of this matters to him, because the jungle in front of him is Rudy's home.